My wife always said that these guys were just her friends and called me a jealous fool. But then this happened. She was folding a pair of jeans with way too much care, like the fabric might shatter if she got too rough. Her suitcase lay open on the bed, half packed, half taunting. Avery always said she hated overpacking, but today she was being deliberate. Precise. Like she was packing for more than just a weekend. I stood by the dresser, pretending to scroll through emails on my phone, but all I could really focus on was the tension strung between us, tight as piano wire. Just a work retreat, she said, not even looking up. 2 nights. That's all. I nodded once. With Evan, right. That got her attention. She paused mid-fold. Her lips parted just slightly before sealing again in a tight, practiced smile, the kind people wear when they're preparing to lie with grace. Yeah, she said. But it's not like that. Not like what, Avery? I didn't say it. Didn't let the words out, because if I had, this whole thing might have erupted into flames right there in the bedroom. And I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. She zipped the small inner compartment and reached for her toiletries bag. I watched her, not because I was curious, but because I needed to remember this moment. The scent of her perfume already lingering in the air. The nervous way she avoided eye contact. The tiniest tremble in her fingers when she dropped her hairbrush in the side pocket. Can you imagine watching your wife pack a bag to spend the weekend with another man and being told, with a straight face, that it's just work? I wanted to believe her. God, part of me still did. But that part was buried under layers of gut instinct, long silences, and the kind of trust erosion that doesn't happen overnight. You want me to drop you at the airport? I asked. She shook her head, still focused on her packing. Evan's picking me up. Of course he is. My chest burned, but I kept my face still. No accusations. No raised voice. Just this awful quiet that filled every inch of space between us. That's convenient, I said, softer than I meant to. But it still landed like a slap. She turned then, slowly, like someone bracing for impact. Logan, please don't do this. I raised an eyebrow. Do what? She hesitated. Make it into something it's not. I could have laughed. Really? If it hadn't hurt so damn much. Instead, I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, and looked at her the way you look at someone you don't recognize anymore, someone you once loved without question. You ever think, I said, my voice low, that maybe it already is something? And I'm just the last to find out. That cracked her mask. Just slightly. Her eyes darted away, and that's when I knew, whatever this was, it wasn't innocent. Not anymore. She zipped the suitcase, stood it upright, and took a slow breath. I'll be back Sunday evening, she said. Not, I love you. Not even a hug. Just logistics. I stepped aside so she could pass, and as she rolled the suitcase toward the door, I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the hallway mirror. She looked polished. Poised. Like someone about to walk into a conference room or someone walking out of a life. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and for a long time, I didn't move. I just stood there in the quiet, staring at the space where she'd been, and wondering, not if she'd come back, but who she'd be when she did. And more importantly, who I'd be by then. You'd think that once the door closes, once the suitcase wheels fade down the hall and the elevator dings shut, there'd be relief. A moment to breathe. Maybe even a sense of calm. But that's not what happened. I stood there in the stillness of our apartment for a long while after Avery left. Everything around me looked the same, the framed photo of us in Napa, the throw blanket she always said was too soft to use, the lingering scent of her hair product still curling through the hallway air. But the space felt different. Hollow, almost. Like the gravity had shifted. I didn't move right away. I just sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, staring at the blank screen like it might tell me what to do next. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger's loud. Messy. It wants to fight. What I felt, it was quieter than that. Like fog creeping in under a door. Not rage, just the beginning of detachment. And that scared me more. The first few hours alone were uneventful. I threw on a hoodie, ordered some takeout, and flipped on the TV to distract myself, something loud and meaningless. But even with the volume up, I could hear it, the absence of her. The way her voice usually bounced off these walls, the sound of her heels across the hardwood, the muffled laughter from the bathroom when she FaceTimed her sister. Gone. At first, I checked my phone every few minutes. Not obsessively, just reflex. But nothing came in. Not a single text. Not even a landed safe or one of those casual, obligatory updates like room's nice. Instead, I got silence. And that silence, it started talking louder than anything else. Around 9, my phone buzzed. My heart jumped before I even looked. Stupid, I know. Turned out it was just a group message from the guys in the fantasy league, talking trash about next week's matchups. I muted it and set the phone face down. 10 minutes later, another buzz. Email from work. I didn't open it. Then nothing. I remember walking to the kitchen, opening the fridge, closing it again without grabbing a thing. I wasn't hungry. I was unsettled. Like my body knew something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. And that's when I caught myself doing it, pacing. Not angry pacing. Not even worried. Just moving to keep from sinking. I stood by the window, looking out over the city lights, trying to make sense of this weird tension. It wasn't jealousy. I didn't want to punch Evan or blow up her phone demanding answers. No, what I wanted was clarity. Something real. Something that would prove what I already suspected but hadn't dared to say out loud. But that proof hadn't come yet. So I waited. Sometime around midnight, I crawled into bed, not because I was tired, but because I didn't want to admit how much I was still waiting. I left my phone on the nightstand, screen up this time, just in case. Still nothing. Can you imagine lying there in the dark, staring at a ceiling you painted together, trying not to think about who she's laughing with in some out-of-town bar? I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Just drifted in and out of shallow dreams where nothing made sense. And when morning came, I wasn't refreshed, I was resolved. Not because anything had happened, but because nothing had. That silence. That's what finally told me what I needed to know. It's not always the lies that break you. Sometimes it's the emptiness where the truth should be. It was Saturday morning when I saw the photo. I hadn't been looking for it, that's the part that stung the most. It wasn't like I'd gone digging through her social media, scrolling through tagged pictures like some desperate detective. No. It found me. A notification popped up while I was pouring coffee. Avery Sinclair was tagged in a photo. Just a flash across my screen, casual, harmless. Except nothing felt harmless anymore. I didn't even click it at first. Just let the notification linger there while I stared out the kitchen window, waiting for the coffee to finish dripping into the pot. The sky was overcast, and the apartment felt colder than usual, or maybe I was just noticing it more now. Eventually, curiosity, or maybe instinct, won out. The photo loaded slow. Wi-Fi was being weird again. But once it did, everything around me went still. It was a bar. Not one I recognized. Dim lighting. Neon beer signs. Two people sitting at a small, round table near the back. And there she was, Avery. Her hair pulled back the way she only does when she wants to look effortless. That half smile she gives when she's tipsy, comfortable. Her hand was resting on the table, fingers dangerously close to Evan's. And him. He was leaning in. Smiling like he knew something the rest of the world didn't. It wasn't what they were doing. It was how they looked. The intimacy. The closeness. That photo wasn't posed. It wasn't staged. It was candid and real. Too real. And I knew, in that moment, that this wasn't a work thing. It wasn't business. It wasn't even a mistake. It was a choice. Funny thing is, I didn't feel rage. Not immediately. There was no urge to call her, no explosion building in my chest. What I felt was clarity. A strange kind of peace that came from knowing exactly where the line had been crossed. Because up until that moment, I'd still been living in the gray. Half suspecting. Half denying. Making excuses in my head to avoid the truth staring me down. But now I had the picture. The evidence. The confirmation. So I saved it. Quietly. No drama. No message sent. I just closed the app, locked my phone, and sat down at the kitchen table with my coffee, letting it go cold while I stared at the wall and began sorting through a very different kind of plan. See, when you realize someone's been lying to your face, the first thing you want to do is confront. Shake them until the truth spills out. But sometimes the smartest thing you can do is wait. Let them walk back through that door believing nothing's changed. Let them feel safe again. Because that's when they reveal who they really are. So I didn't react. I didn't text. I didn't even let my breathing change. I simply sat there, sipping that bitter, room temperature coffee, and I started thinking. Not about her. About me. About what I wanted now that the truth was out in the open. And that's when I realized, this wasn't about saving the marriage anymore. It was about saving myself. I heard the key turn in the lock just after 2 p.m. on Sunday, a full day earlier than planned. It caught me off guard, but only for a second. I didn't panic. I didn't scramble to clean anything or check the time. I just stayed right where I was, on the couch, flipping through a book I wasn't really reading, the soft hum of jazz playing in the background. When the door opened, She hesitated in the threshold. Like something felt off. I didn't get up to greet her. "Hey," Avery said, stepping inside with an airy tone that didn't match her tight posture. She dragged the suitcase across the floor, her eyes darting around the apartment like she was walking into someone else's home. It was cleaner than usual. That was on purpose. Everything in its place. Candles lit, not the kind she liked, the kind I used to burn before we got married. A different scent filled the space now. Warm amber and sandalwood. Masculine. Controlled. She kicked off her shoes by the door and glanced around again. Her smile was thin, forced. "You're home early," she said. "You are too," I replied, calmly turning a page. She dropped her bag by the wall but didn't move any closer. I didn't ask why she came back early. She didn't volunteer the information. Instead, she stood there quietly, scanning the room like she was searching for a missing detail. Her eyes lingered on the coffee table, spotless, except for a single item she hadn't expected. A crumpled foil wrapper. Something unmistakably male. Her breath hitched. She didn't speak, didn't ask. She just stared at it for a second too long before looking away, cheeks stiffening. Then she moved toward the kitchen slowly, and I could hear the drawers opening, too fast, too sharp. Like she was trying to busy herself, to reset whatever strange current was running through the room. I didn't move. The tension stretched like wire. She returned a minute later with a glass of water she didn't need. Took a sip. Set it down hard on the coaster. "So, what did you do this weekend?" she asked, voice a little too casual. I looked up at her then. Held her eyes. "Had dinner." "With who?" I shrugged. "Someone from the gym." A beat of silence passed. Her mouth twitched like she wanted to say something more, but didn't know how to ask it without sounding accusatory. "You didn't mention that before," she said finally. I offered a small smile. Didn't know I had to. That landed like a dropped stone in still water. Her fingers curled around the edge of the countertop. She nodded once, pretending to take it in stride, but I could see it, the question circling behind her eyes. The math she was trying to do. Then she noticed something else, a receipt sticking out from the trash bin under the sink. She bent down and plucked it free. The print was faded but still readable. 2 entrees. 1 bottle of wine. The name of a restaurant she'd never been to, and we'd certainly never gone to together. She didn't look up. Just stood there staring at it. And in that moment, something shifted. The air between us flipped, like she realized, for the first time, that maybe she wasn't the one steering this anymore. You ever see someone try to swallow their own fear? That was her, right then. She folded the receipt in half with trembling fingers, set it down carefully on the counter, and straightened up like nothing had happened. "New place?" she asked, voice steady but hollow. "Yeah," I said, not offering more. And that was it. That was all I gave her. The silence that followed was the kind that says more than shouting ever could. And behind her eyes, I saw it. The smallest flicker of panic. Not because of what she found, but because she knew the game had changed. She didn't say a word when I walked through the door that night. I could feel her eyes on me the second I stepped inside. I didn't have to look to know where she was, perched on the arm of the couch, legs crossed, pretending to scroll through her phone like she hadn't been waiting for that lock to turn for the last hour. I closed the door behind me gently. Hung my keys with deliberate calm. Shrugged off my jacket and laid it across the bench by the wall, not tossed, placed. And still, she said nothing. I crossed the room slow, deliberate. The kind of silence you can hear. The kind that builds pressure in your chest. The cologne I'd worn that evening, it wasn't anything she'd picked. Wasn't even a brand she knew. I'd bought it that morning. A small bottle, nothing flashy, but sharp and unfamiliar. The kind of scent that lingers in the doorway long after you've left. I passed her as I made my way to the kitchen. I saw the moment she caught it, that blink and miss it shift in her expression. Her eyes flared just a second longer than normal. The phone in her hand twitched slightly. Still, she said nothing. I poured a glass of water, took a slow sip, and leaned against the counter like this was any other night. Like we weren't circling each other in a cold war of subtle movements and careful glances. She finally broke the silence. "You smell different." Her voice was calm. Light. But beneath it, I heard it, the strain, the test. I turned to her, lifted an eyebrow. "Do I?" She nodded once, eyes narrowing. "New cologne." I let a smile play on my lips. "Yeah. Picked it up earlier. Figured it was time for a change." That smile didn't reach her. It hung there between us like smoke, soft, hazy, suffocating. She stood then, slow and deliberate. Walked toward me, too casual. Too calculated. She stopped a foot away, her eyes never leaving mine. I could see her breathing, just slightly shallower than usual. You don't usually wear cologne, she said. I do now. Another silence. She tilted her head. You going somewhere? I took another sip of water. Let the pause stretch before answering. Just felt like freshening up. That was it. No apology. No confession. No details. Just enough to make her wonder. Her eyes scanned my face for a crack, a cue, some sign of where I'd been, who I'd seen. But there was nothing. I gave her absolutely nothing. And that's when I saw it, the flicker of doubt morphing into something else. Fear. Maybe. Not the kind that comes from danger. The kind that comes when you realize the control you thought you had is gone. She stepped back, lips parting as if to ask more. But nothing came out. Instead, she nodded, turned away, and walked down the hall without another word. Her footsteps were soft, uncertain, like she didn't know what to do with this new version of me. The one who didn't chase, didn't justify, didn't play by her script anymore. And I just stood there in the kitchen, sipping water that had long since gone warm, letting the silence settle back into its rightful place. I wasn't angry. I wasn't smug. I was something else entirely. Detached. And from the look in her eyes, she could feel it too. The next morning, she made French toast. It wasn't even a weekend thing, not for us. But there she was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, cinnamon in the air, humming that off-key tune she always defaulted to when she wanted things to feel normal. I stayed in the doorway a moment, just watching her. She plated the toast neatly. Sprinkled powdered sugar. Even had warm syrup in a little dish like it was a cafe brunch. 2 plates, 2 mugs, 2 clean forks laid out side by side. It was the kind of effort she hadn't made in a long time. And I knew why. I sat across from her without saying a word. Just nodded once in thanks and started eating. She watched me for a bit before picking up her fork. Her smile was practiced. Gentle. A little too soft. She kept tucking her hair behind her ear like she was nervous, like the kitchen table had become some kind of negotiation space. I didn't get to tell you much about the trip, she said, eyes on her plate. I chewed, swallowed. You don't have to. She glanced up at me quickly, then away again. No, I want to. I mean, there's probably things that looked worse than they were. I let her talk. Didn't push. Didn't offer reassurances. She was trying to build a bridge. And I was letting it stay unfinished. After breakfast, she cleared the dishes while I stood by the sink. For a moment, we moved around each other like we used to, quiet rhythm, familiar motions. But when I turned to rinse my cup, she reached out. Not dramatically. Not even with intention. Just, soft fingers grazing my back. That old, instinctive touch she used to do when passing by. The one that used to feel like home. But it didn't land the same this time. I stepped forward, not abruptly, not rudely, just naturally, as if I hadn't even noticed. And that small, familiar touch. It never connected. She froze behind me. I could feel it, that stillness. That cold realization sinking in. Not because I'd rejected her outright, but because I hadn't even reacted. She stayed behind me for a few seconds longer, then went back to wiping the counter, slower now. Quieter. I turned off the faucet, dried my hands, and leaned against the edge of the sink. You don't have to do all this, I said, finally breaking the silence. She glanced at me, forced a small smile. I just wanted it to feel like us again. There it was. Us. A word that used to mean something real. Now it felt more like a placeholder for a memory we couldn't touch anymore. I nodded. I know. That's all I gave her. Because the truth was, I didn't want French toast. I didn't want explanations. And I didn't want to be touched by someone who only reached out when they were afraid of what they might lose. She wanted comfort. What she got was distance. And she felt every inch of it. Dinner was quiet. Not tense, not exactly, but quiet in that strange, heavy way where both people are pretending they're not waiting for the same moment to arrive. She'd made salmon. Her go-to when she was trying to keep things light. Comforting. Familiar. I sat at the table across from her, cutting neatly through the fillet. My appetite wasn't all there, but I ate anyway, methodically, like the ritual of chewing and swallowing could somehow keep everything from spilling out. Halfway through the meal, she set down her fork and looked up at me. I felt it before she spoke, that breath she took, like she was about to dive into cold water. So, I wanted to tell you more about the trip, she said softly, fingers curling around her napkin. Here it was. I didn't look up right away. Just nodded once. She hesitated. Waited for me to ask. I didn't. Instead, I reached for my water and took a slow sip. I know how it might have looked, she continued. With Evan, I mean. But I need you to believe me when I say, it was strictly work. I know you might have seen something online, Or maybe you heard something, but that's nice, I said, cutting in gently. Not harsh. Not sarcastic. Just final. Her eyes blinked fast. What? I set my glass down carefully. I said that's nice. The words hung there like smoke between us. She didn't speak at first. Just stared at me like she couldn't tell whether I'd misunderstood her, or just didn't care. I didn't clarify. Instead, I kept eating, slow, clean bites, while her fork hovered above her plate like it had forgotten what to do. The silence stretched again. This time, it was hers to fill. You don't believe me, she said finally. Not a question. A quiet admission. I glanced up just long enough to meet her eyes. I didn't say that. But you think something happened? I gave a faint shrug. Does it matter what I think? Her mouth opened, then closed again. Because deep down, she knew the truth. She wasn't really trying to explain. She was trying to reclaim control. Narrative. Me. But that ship? It had already sailed. She poked at her food for a bit, trying to act casual. Trying to hold onto dignity when the ground was quietly slipping out from under her. Look, she said after a while, her voice a little thinner now. You and I, we've had our tough patches, right? But we always talk things through. I set down my fork, leaned back in my chair, and folded my hands in my lap. Then talk, I said. She flinched slightly. Not because of the words, but the tone. Calm. Steady. Like I wasn't hoping for anything from her anymore. And maybe that was what unsettled her most. There was no anger to fight against. No wounded pride. Just a man sitting across from her who no longer needed the answer she'd rehearsed. The rest of dinner passed in silence. After she cleared the plates, I stood and walked down the hall, not with drama, not with finality. Just quiet purpose. I didn't slam doors. Didn't raise my voice. But the message was clear: if she was still playing her game, I'd stopped being her opponent. She waited until the next morning. Maybe she thought a night's sleep would shift something. That I'd wake up with softened edges. That whatever chill had settled between us would melt with the sunrise. But it didn't. The house was still. I was standing by the window, sipping black coffee, eyes fixed on the gray sky that hadn't changed much in days. I didn't hear her come in at first. She moved that quietly. Morning, she said, voice low, careful. Morning, I replied without turning. A beat of silence passed. Then I felt her behind me, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel the intention in the air. She brushed past me toward the kitchen. Her robe was tied tighter than usual. Her steps were slower, hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she belonged in this space anymore. A few minutes passed. The smell of toast. The clink of a spoon against a mug. I stayed at the window. Eventually, she moved closer. Not with words, with touch. A light hand at my back. Fingers tracing the space just beneath my shoulder blade. Not rushed. Not desperate. Just a soft reminder of what we used to be. I didn't move. Then her other hand came up, sliding slowly around my waist. Her body pressed gently against mine, warm and familiar. She rested her cheek on my shoulder and exhaled. I miss us, she whispered. I stared out the window. She waited. Waited for my hands to cover hers. For my body to lean back into hers. For that signal, even the smallest one, that I was still reachable. But I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't breathe differently. Her fingers twitched slightly. I could feel her heartbeat against my back, fast and unsure. She shifted, moving in front of me now, placing her hands on my chest like she was trying to anchor herself there. Her eyes searched mine, wide, pleading. I still want this, she said. We can fix it, Logan. We can. Her hands slid up to my shoulders, her body pressing in close. I felt the warmth of her, the old familiarity of her skin, the scent of her hair, all of it. But none of it pulled me in. She tilted her face up, lips just inches from mine. And I didn't move. Didn't lean in. Didn't close the space. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the panic ripple through her eyes when she realized I wasn't fighting her. But I wasn't reaching for her, either. And that undid her more than anything. Because you can argue with anger. You can plead with heartbreak. But indifference, that's a wall no one knows how to climb. Slowly, her hand slipped from my chest. She stepped back, arms folding over herself like she'd been stripped of something invisible. I turned from the window then, walked past her without a word, and set my empty mug in the sink. She didn't follow. She just stood there in the quiet, arms wrapped tight around her body, like she was trying to hold in what was left of her pride. I didn't shut the door behind me. Didn't need to. Because for the first time since she'd come home, she understood she couldn't touch me anymore. Not like before. Not ever again. Dinner that night was quieter than usual, which, by that point, was saying something. I'd made something simple. Pasta. She offered to help, but I told her I had it. She nodded and stepped back, hovering just outside the kitchen, watching like a guest unsure if they were welcome. We ate without much small talk. She kept her eyes on her plate most of the time, barely touching the wine she'd poured. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her napkin, a little nervous tick I'd seen 100 times, but never quite like this. Not with her shoulders drawn in. Not with her voice so cautious. About halfway through the meal, she finally spoke. "So," she said, like she was testing the sound of her own voice, "about the trip, I didn't look up. Just took another bite." She pushed her food around with her fork, the clinking louder than it should have been. "I want to explain. Not to make excuses. Just, to be honest." I nodded slightly, eyes still on my plate. "Okay." She hesitated. Waited again. Like she wanted to hear me ask what happened, or why, but I didn't give her the opening. She cleared her throat. "Evan and I, we've known each other for a long time. We've worked together on a lot of campaigns. I've always trusted him." I let the silence stretch a moment before answering. "You don't owe me his resume." She winced, not from the sharpness, because there wasn't any. That was the part that shook her. I wasn't angry. I wasn't baiting her. I was just done. She tried again. "I mean, nothing happened. Not in the way you think. But I know how it looked. That photo, and me coming home early. I get it. I messed this up." I looked at her then. Really looked. She wasn't putting on a show anymore. Her eyes were tired. Voice thin. Like someone trying to walk across ice, not knowing where it might crack. I took a breath. "Why are you telling me this now?" She blinked. "Because I don't want to lose you." The way she said it, soft, real, might have cracked something in me 6 months ago. But tonight, it landed like a pebble tossed into a lake that had already frozen over. I leaned back in my chair and nodded. "That's honest." Her eyes lit up just slightly, like hope had found the smallest gap. "I mean it," she said. "I want to fix this. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." I nodded again, slowly. "I know." She waited, breath caught, hands clasped, waiting for me to reach across the table, to say me too. To say we'd try. But I didn't. I just stood, carried my plate to the sink, and started rinsing it off. Calm. Unhurried. Behind me, the silence grew sharp again. I didn't turn around until I heard her voice, barely above a whisper. "Don't you want to ask me anything?" I set the plate down, turned off the faucet. "No," I said softly. "I already have everything I need." And when I looked back at her, I saw it, that flicker of finality in her eyes. Because she realized then, I wasn't confused. I wasn't wrestling with trust. I was simply finished. Not in a cruel way. Not in a way that screamed or shattered dishes. But in the quiet, irreversible way of a man who had already let go. She started talking more after that night. Not in a forced way. Not all at once. But like someone trying to patch a leak with trembling hands, stuffing words into every crack, hoping something might hold. Little things, at first. Comments over breakfast. "We used to love that place, remember, when a song played in the background." Or, "I found that sweater you liked," holding it up with a too bright smile like it meant more than it ever could now. She tried to make the house feel like before. Candles, old playlists, even a batch of cookies she used to make back when we first moved in. The scent filled the kitchen like a memory, but not a comforting one. It felt like a reenactment. I'd watch her from across the room sometimes, noticing the way her hands trembled when she didn't think I was looking. How she checked her phone like she expected something, or maybe hoped for something that would make this less real. But reality doesn't text back. And the more she tried to pretend things were fixable, the more she unraveled. It was in the way her voice cracked when I didn't respond to a joke. The way her smile would falter mid-sentence when she realized I wasn't smiling back. The way she lingered in doorways like she was waiting for an invitation that never came. And every time I answered with a nod instead of a conversation, or left the room without touching her shoulder like I used to, something inside her pulled tighter. Thinner. She started asking little questions. "Where were you today? Who were you texting?" Not with suspicion, not really. More like fear. Like a child asking if the monsters are real, hoping you'll say no. Sometimes I'd answer. Sometimes I wouldn't. Because the truth? She was starting to understand. It wasn't that I was seeing someone else. It was that I didn't need her to ask anymore. The power she once held, that subtle, magnetic pull she used to use to steer our conversations, our routines, our marriage, it was gone. I was still there, still physically present, but emotionally. I had drifted so far from her shores that no call could bring me back. One night, I walked in from the gym and found her sitting on the floor by the window, knees pulled to her chest, a blanket around her shoulders. She looked up at me like she wanted to say something, a tearful speech maybe, some confession or plea. But I just walked past her with a polite, "Hey," and went to shower. When I came out, she was still there. Still curled up, staring at nothing. She didn't speak. Neither did I. And in that silence, we both heard it, the slow, quiet snapping of threads. The control she thought she had, the certainty she used to wear like armor, the carefully constructed image of a marriage she could shape with enough charm or effort. It was all unraveling. And I wasn't pulling on the thread. She was. One desperate tug at a time. She must have seen it the moment she walked into the bedroom. There, resting neatly on her pillow, a manila folder, slim and centered, like I'd measured its placement. The bedroom was dim, lit only by the fading streaks of late afternoon sun bleeding through the blinds. The room was quiet. No TV, no music, no ambient noise to distract from the sharp, focused silence of that moment. Avery froze in the doorway. I was in the living room, not hiding, just giving her space. She didn't call my name. Didn't ask what it was. She already knew. Her steps were slow, careful. When she reached the bed, she stared at the folder for a long moment before she touched it. Almost like she thought opening it might trigger something irreversible, as if that hadn't already happened weeks ago. The clip held everything together. On top, her flight receipts. Booked last minute. One way there, return pushed forward. The timing didn't lie. Just beneath that, a printed copy of the bar photo. The one she'd never asked me about. The one she pretended didn't exist. Her hand hovered over it. And finally, below it all, the divorce papers. Neatly signed. Every page accounted for. My name in clear, patient strokes. Nothing dramatic. Nothing angry. Just, decided. The way a man signs a delivery slip when he knows the package was never his to keep. She sat down slowly, the bed shifting under her weight. Her fingers trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. I didn't walk in right away. I gave her that moment. Because this was the only conversation we still had left to have. When I finally entered the room, she looked up at me with eyes already glassy. Not broken. Not yet. Just confused in that deep, aching way people get when they realize the gravity has changed and nothing's anchored them anymore. "You're leaving?" she asked, her voice barely there. I stood by the door, hands in my pockets. "No," I said softly. "I already left. Weeks ago." She shook her head. "But we never even talked about." I stepped closer, just enough so she could hear the calm in my voice. "You never talked. You explained. You justified. You controlled the tempo. But we haven't talked in a long time." She swallowed hard. Her hand rested on the bar photo. "I made a mistake. You made a choice," I corrected. "And then you kept making it." Her lips parted, but the words caught in her throat. "I didn't do this to punish you," I added. "I did it to free myself. Because I kept waiting for you to see me again. To choose me again. And you never did." She looked at the papers like they might rewrite themselves. Then, slowly, she whispered, "You could have just asked me to stop." I nodded. "And you would have said it was all in my head." Her silence was confirmation enough. I walked to the dresser, grabbed my bag, packed earlier, zipped, ready. It wasn't dramatic. No boxes, no luggage carts. Just the essentials. As I headed toward the door, she asked, one final question, a whisper behind me, "Is there someone else?" I stopped for just a breath, then turned slightly. "There's someone I've been getting to know," I said. She stiffened. "It's not another woman," I added. "It's me." I didn't wait for her reaction. Didn't offer her comfort or closure. Because what needed to be said was already sitting on her pillow, signed, sealed, and finally, unshakably clear. As I closed the front door behind me, the hallway felt wider. Lighter. And for the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward it.